Argentina is governed by a right-wing libertarian named Javier Milei. He proudly calls himself an anarcho-capitalist, and when he campaigned for president in 2023, he brought a chainsaw to rallies and he pledged to cut government spending down to the bone. He also promised that he was going to dollarize the Argentine economy to get rid of his country's monetary sovereignty and to adopt the US dollar as the official currency of the country. Since he came to power in December 2023, Milei has been one of the most pro-US leaders on earth, and he has allied himself very closely with Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Not only do they agree politically on most issues, but also Argentina has some of the world's largest lithium reserves. And Elon Musk is the CEO of Tesla, which needs a lot of lithium for the batteries in its electric vehicles. And he's hoping he can get access to large supplies of very cheap lithium in Argentina. Although it has become uncertain if Milei will even be able to finish his presidential term, because in February 2025, he unleashed a massive scandal when he promoted a cryptocurrency scam that led tens of thousands of his own supporters to lose tens of millions of dollars. Milei promoted a meme coin called Libra, and he told people to invest in it. And what happened, it was known as a rug pull. It was a pump and dump scheme where a small handful of investors who had inside knowledge bought up huge sums of the coin in the early hours as there was a massive rally, and then they immediately sold their holdings and the price crashed. It was a classic pump and dump scheme, except this happened in record time. More than 100 lawsuits were filed in Argentina accusing the president of fraud and being part of a pump and dump scheme because a notorious meme coin marketer had actually been collaborating with Milei, and he identified himself as an advisor to Milei, and he admitted that his team bought up the Libra coin immediately when it was launched in a very shady practice known as sniping. This led crypto media outlets to accuse Milei's ally of rigging the game for insiders. And by the way, I should point out that some of the same people were behind the launch of the meme coin Melania that was backed by Donald Trump's wife, Melania Trump. And Trump himself also launched a meme coin. And in all of these cases, we've seen huge pump and dump schemes where in a few hours the price of the meme coin skyrockets and then almost immediately it crashes. The vast majority of investors lose their money, and a small handful of people get extremely rich. So what this shows is that these right-wing leaders like Javier Milei and Donald Trump are actually exploiting their own supporters. They're promoting pump and dump schemes to their own supporters. And as tragic as this is, it's actually a perfect example of what Milei has been doing to the economy of Argentina. Under his extreme libertarian policies, more than half of the population in Argentina is now living in poverty. He's trying to push through extreme anti-worker policies like increasing the workday from 8 hours to 12 hours. And his extreme policies are leading to the rapid deindustrialization of the Argentine economy, which is basically becoming a kind of resource colony for US corporations. So Argentina will no longer have its own industry. Instead, its economy will be based on simply exporting agricultural products and raw materials like lithium to US corporations who will benefit. And meanwhile, foreign investors have been very happy because the stock market in Argentina has been growing very rapidly, but the real economy is in severe crisis and recession. So there's a deindustrialization and a simultaneous financialization of the economy. It looks like the Argentine economy is doing well because of this big financial bubble, which has been inflated by foreign investors who support Milei. But after Milei started facing crises, including his promotion of this cryptocurrency scam, we've already seen some investors flee out of Argentina. So today I'm going to explain how Argentina is in a very dangerous situation and its economy is in severe crisis. But to understand how we got here, we need to look at the past few years and see how Milei has increasingly turned Argentina into a semi-colony of the United States. Now, back in 2023, Argentina had a center-left government that was trying to join BRICS, and it actually had been invited to join BRICS at the 2023 summit. However, when Milei came to power in December of that year, he rejected the invitation and prevented Argentina from joining BRICS. To justify his decision, Milei attacked China and Russia, condemning them as communists. Apparently, he thinks Russia is still communist. And at an event at a U.S. think tank, Milei said, quote, "Our geopolitical alignment is with the United States and Israel. We are not going to align ourselves with communists," end quote. So in addition to allying as closely as possible with the United States, Milei has also strongly supported Israel as it has carried out crimes against humanity in Gaza, and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces an arrest warrant at the International Criminal Court. But Milei's government in Argentina has been one of the very few countries on earth that has joined with the United States in voting against the vast majority of the international community at the United Nations General Assembly. Argentina has opposed the right of the Palestinian people to have their own country, and Argentina has supported Israel's illegal occupation of Palestinian territory. Milei has also given free rein to the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency to operate in Argentina, and he invited the CIA director to come to Buenos Aires to meet with top government officials, and they signed an agreement in which the CIA will train Argentina's intelligence services on how to combat what they call terror. While Milei calls himself a libertarian, he has also embraced right-wing conservative cultural policies. He wants the state to ban abortion and control women's bodies. And he also has strongly supported Spanish colonialism, praising the history of Spanish colonialism in the Americas, which is as authoritarian as something gets, supporting colonialism. He has also strongly allied Argentina with Ukraine and supported Ukraine in the NATO proxy war against Russia. He even invited Ukraine's leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, to his inauguration in Argentina, and they did a photo shoot in which they had a big hug. Milei has also given the U.S. military control over key parts of Argentina, including he gave the U.S. military an Argentine ammunition factory for weapons, and now this Argentine ammunition factory is creating military equipment for Ukraine and NATO on behalf of the U.S. military. Now, given Argentina's extremely pro-U.S. geopolitical alignment, it's no surprise to see that the Western media has praised Milei, and especially conservative media outlets in the West. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which is dominated by the US and based in Washington, has also praised Milei, and the financial press in the West has loved Milei and constantly congratulated him. And it's easy to explain why. Milei has made the rich much, much richer in Argentina and in other countries. If you're a wealthy foreign investor and you invested in Argentina's main stock index, the Merval, you made a lot of money. If you invested in the Argentine stock market in October 2023 when Milei won the election, in the next 14 months, your investment increased by 4 times over. So obviously a lot of rich people have been very happy with Milei because even though a majority of the population is living in poverty, they have gotten much richer. Although I should say that the stock market peaked in early January 2025, and in January and February, it did start to fall, especially after Milei caused a huge scandal in Argentina by promoting a cryptocurrency pump and dump scheme that led thousands of his own supporters to lose tens of millions of dollars. But what's crazy about that is that even though Milei is facing over 100 lawsuits and legal complaints and a formal investigation for fraud allegations and calls for impeachment, despite that and the relative fall in the stock market, even if investors in the Argentine stock market didn't sell their holdings, they're still way up compared to where they were when Milei took office. So this is why many foreign financial media outlets are portraying the economy under Milei as if it were doing well. Some people are even calling it a miracle. However, the stock market is not the real economy. Yes, the stock market in Argentina has done great, but the real economy has been in severe crisis Hundreds of thousands of jobs have been destroyed. Social spending has been completely gutted. And the majority of people in Argentina are living in poverty. This is according to official data published by Argentina's Ministry of the Economy, which is overseen by Milei's government. The economic ministry has something called the INDEC, which is the National Institute of Statistics. And in September, they published a report that showed that 52.9%, that is 53% of people in Argentina, are living in poverty. This same report noted that the average cost of a basic basket of goods and services that a household needs to survive, things like food and electricity and water, that costs 709,000 Argentine pesos every month. However, the average household income of a family in Argentina is only 407,000 pesos, so they can't even afford the basic basket that they need. And just the basic basket of food to not starve, the basic food basket in Argentina costs 349,000 Argentine pesos per month, which is a bit lower than the average income. So Argentine families on average are making just enough money to not starve, to feed themselves, but the actual quality of their life has gotten significantly worse. Milei is also trying to push through so-called labor reform that would allow a 12-hour workday without overtime pay. So, of course, the limit now is 8. So if you're a worker and you don't want to work 12 hours without getting paid extra, your boss can fire you. No questions asked. And another part of this so-called labor reform, which is being demanded by Argentine oligarchs, is that they want to be able to pay their workers with tickets. They actually use that term in Spanish, ticket. And that means that part of your pay will actually be in real money, but then the other part of your pay will be in coupons that you can only use at supermarkets or a few specific businesses. These are the policies that Milei is trying to push through. They're as anti-worker as policies get. And of course, these policies benefit the billionaires and millionaires who supported Milei during his presidential campaign and who strongly continue to support him today, not only inside Argentina, but also around the world, especially in Silicon Valley and on Wall Street. And also in Argentina, many of the media outlets are owned by billionaire and millionaire oligarchs who are very right-wing and who also have supported Milei. A poll in June 2024 found that 72% of people in Argentina say that they were worse off under Milei, and that the majority of people in the country had to use their savings in order to meet their everyday needs, to buy things like food. What's strange, though, is that he still had an approval rating of 43%. Now, obviously, that's not very high. That means that the majority of people disapprove of him. But if 43% approve of him, that means that some people who admit that they're worse off economically under him still support him, which shows the power of propaganda in the media, which has convinced people that supposedly he's going to make their lives better. But while their lives are getting worse and they're living in poverty, they still believe what the billionaire-owned media outlets are telling them, that supposedly Milei will make their life better. Another report that was published by the National Institute of Statistics at the Ministry of the Economy, so again, this was published by Milei's government. In a report from December, they looked at the distribution of income, and they found that the richest 10% of people in Argentina are making 24.5% of all of the income. The richest 20% are making roughly 40% of all income. The richest 30% are making more than 50% of all income. And the bottom 50% of people in Argentina are only making 29% of the income. And this is just income. Most rich people are not rich because they have high levels of income. They are rich because they have assets. They make investments. Just looking at income inequality, we see that Argentina is extremely unequal, and a small handful of elites are benefiting from Milei's policies. So what have those policies been? Well, Milei has been aggressively cutting government spending. He reduced the government budget by 30%. He fired 30,000 government employees, and he closed 13 government ministries. Among the ministries he closed were the Ministry of Education, which he closed, the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation was closed, the Ministry of Transportation, overseeing public transportation, was closed, the Ministry of Work, Employment, and Social Security was closed, the Ministry of Public Works closed, the Ministry of the Environment was closed, the Ministry of Women was closed, and the Ministry of Tourism and Sports was closed, along with other ministries. Now, what's ironic for a so-called libertarian is that while he's slashing social spending to the bone, Milei has been drastically expanding spending on the police, spy agencies, and the military. So this is real, actually existing libertarianism, which is cutting healthcare and education and infrastructure and massively expanding spending on the repressive apparatus of the state. The police, the cops, the military, the spies. The Secretariat of Intelligence in Argentina had its budget increased by 216% in the first year of Milei. 216% increase, including also a big increase for the military and the police budget. But what are the parts of the government that have seen the largest cuts? The largest cut was for the Secretariat of Science, Technology, and Innovation. As I said, the ministry was closed down, and instead he made it a smaller desk in another ministry. The Secretariat of Science, Technology, and Innovation had its budget cut by 98%. So destroying science and innovation in the country. And as I'll talk about later, what Milei is really doing is he's destroying industry in Argentina, overseeing massive deindustrialization, and he's basically turning Argentina into an agricultural colony of the Western powers, of the US and Europe that previously colonized Argentina. The modern day area of Argentina was originally colonized by the Spanish Empire, and then the British Empire had basically unofficially colonized Argentina. It was known as an unofficial British colony. And what Milei is doing is destroying an entire generation of skilled workers, of technicians, of engineers, scientists, doctors. He's turning the country into a resource colony for US corporations like Tesla, run by billionaire oligarchs like Elon Musk, who want access to Argentina's lithium, and they want access to other minerals, and they want Argentina's agricultural sector to continue sending food around the world. But Argentina, as a technologically advanced society, is being destroyed. This report in the newspaper El País quoted the Argentine network of authorities of institutes of science and technology, which warned that, quote, investment in science and technology is collapsing today in Argentina, reaching its lowest level since the restoration of democracy in 1983, end quote. Before that, in the 1970s, Argentina was run by a right-wing military dictatorship, which was backed by the United States, basically a US puppet regime. And what we're seeing now is massive brain drain. Anyone with advanced scientific, engineering, medical background in Argentina is looking for a way out. They're going to other countries. So Argentina is losing an entire generation of advanced skilled workers on behalf of the stock market. But the stock market's growing up, so we're supposed to believe that Milei is great and he's helping the country while he's actually destroying an entire generation. So that was the biggest cut. The second biggest cut under Milei was the Ministry of Infrastructure, which he cut by 73.6%. He cut the National Secretariat for Children, Youth, and Family by 60%. He cut the Secretariat of Education, formerly the Ministry of Education, by 52%. And he cut the Ministry of Health by 28%. And the government budget cuts were so extreme that the Ministry of Culture didn't even have toilet paper. They could not afford toilet paper. So when you hear these, US propagandists claim there's no toilet paper in Venezuela, you should remind them, no, actually, it's not Venezuela, it's Argentina where there's no toilet paper, thanks to Javier Milei. Now, here I'm looking at another report which analyzes data as of November 2024, and it looks at the contribution that went to the overall reduction in government spending. So in 1 year, Milei reduced the government budget by 30%. But where did that reduction in spending come from? Well, 24% of the overall reduction came from cutting spending on public works. 22% came from cutting spending on pensions. So retirees have been especially hard hit under Milei. If you're getting a pension, you're living in poverty right now. People are barely getting by, barely surviving. Another 14% of the overall spending reduction came from reduction in spending on welfare, on benefits. As of November 2024, the annual real reduction in government spending, that is accounting for inflation, on transportation fell by 76%. On education, it fell by 60%. On housing, it fell by 84%. On clean drinking water and sewage, it fell by 69%, nearly 70%, because who needs clean water? Capital spending, investment by the government fell by 76%, and transfers to universities fell by 27%. In fact, while Milei is aggressively cutting social spending, the Argentine government is actively giving huge sums of money to rich people, to investors. This is basically class war. How is it doing this? It's through a carry trade that is known in Argentina as the bicicleta financiera, the financial bicycle. How does this financial scheme work? Well, the newspaper El País explained it pretty well. The Argentine government is publicly telling people that it's going to steadily depreciate the peso at a rate of 2% per month. However, investors can buy bonds from the Argentine government in pesos, and they get paid an interest rate of 4 to 5% per month. So what do? You exchange your dollars for Argentine pesos, you buy bonds, and you know that the Argentine peso is going to be devalued at 2% per month, but you're making 4 to 5% per month in interest. So every time you get those interest payments from the government, you exchange your pesos back to dollars and you make a 50% profit. This is a government financial scheme that is giving money to the rich while Milei continues to cut spending on poor and working people. And this is not new in Argentina. It was previously implemented by the far-right military dictatorship in the 1970s, which was backed by the US government again. And it was also brought back in 2016 by the previous right-wing multimillionaire president of Argentina, Mauricio Macri, who is a close ally of the US, particularly a close ally of Donald Trump. And El País, the newspaper, noted that rich Argentines who ride the financial bicycle have gained up to 50% profit in dollars as Milei has been in power. So again, this is a class war. Milei is ruthlessly cutting spending that actually helps poor people and working class people. He's massively expanding the budget for the punitive parts of the state, for the cops, the military, the spies, and he's giving out huge profits to foreign investors and domestic investors. So the rich are getting much, much richer, while 53% of the population lives in poverty. Meanwhile, the cost of living for average people in Argentina has skyrocketed. The cost of water has increased by 305%. The cost of electricity has increased by 189%. The cost of gas has increased by 564%. And the cost of transportation has increased by 601% because public transportation has been gutted. The cost of beef has increased by 160%. The cost of milk has increased by 236.5%. The cost of yerba mate, which is used to make a drink like a tea, which is very popular in Argentina, yerba's price has increased by 140%. And the cost of bread has increased by 174%. Sales in supermarkets have fallen by 11.6%, and sales in shopping centers have fallen by 10%. Meanwhile, Argentina has been deindustrializing at breakneck speed. Manufacturing production has fallen by 6.2%, construction has fallen by 16.6%, and trade has fallen by 8.3%. The local Argentine media outlet Pausa noted that Milei has broken records with the destruction of jobs, not only public sector jobs, but also private sector jobs. As of November 2024, 11 months after Milei came to office, in the previous year, Argentina lost nearly 174,000 private sector jobs. From December 2023, when Milei came into office, until September 2024, an average of 16.4 thousand jobs were being destroyed in the private sector every month on average. This is especially the case in sectors of the economy that are actually producing things, the productive sectors. The financial sector has done great, but the financial sector is a parasite on the real economy. Construction under Milei has completely collapsed. Another sector of the economy that has been extremely hard hit under Milei is industry. What we're seeing is the deindustrialization of Argentina as its economy financializes. Meanwhile, the cost of housing in Argentina skyrocketed. As of the end of October 2024, that year, the cost of housing in the overall Buenos Aires area increased by 135%. The cost of rent in Buenos Aires has absolutely skyrocketed under Milei. And part of this is also because Milei has told foreign investors to come and buy up Argentine real estate, which helps rich people in Argentina who own a lot of houses. They want the price of their houses to increase because then they get richer. But for average working people in Argentina who don't own houses, who don't own multiple apartments or homes, they have seen that the cost of renting an apartment have skyrocketed. And what's so sadistic about Milei is how he does not show an ounce of sympathy for poor people in Argentina who are suffering and going hungry. In fact, this has happened repeatedly where in public someone will protest, and there was a video that went viral of an older man who was yelling at Milei and saying, "We can barely afford food. We're not going to make it to the end of the month. People are going to die of hunger." And Milei said, he just shot back in anger. He said, people wouldn't make it to the end of the month if they were already dead. So just mocking people saying, oh, you say you're going to die of hunger, but you're here now, you're not dying. In fact, Milei gave a speech at a right-wing US think tank called the Hoover Institution. And in this speech, he said, quote, "A moment is going to arrive when people are dying of hunger and they're going to decide some way to not die. I don't need to intervene. Someone will resolve it," end quote. That is an exact quote. And in this speech, he was saying that the government should not provide support to poor people. He said the government should not give food to people who are going hungry because it makes them lazy. And instead of starving to death, they will find a way to not die. What I would say in response to that is, yeah, you know what they'll do? They'll rob food. They'll turn to crime. And then Milei's government, which has massively increased the budget for police and the military, they will round up those poor people and throw them in the privatized prisons. Because, of course, Milei also said that he wants to privatize the prison system. Milei has absolutely no sympathy for the average person in Argentina who is now in poverty. And he constantly makes analogies that make it clear that he is totally out of touch with reality. Of course, Milei is a millionaire, and he's surrounded by a bunch of billionaire and millionaire oligarchs who are his friends. And in an interview with a conservative media outlet in the US, he was asked about people in Argentina who are saying they don't have enough money to buy food. And he said, if someone has a Lamborghini and they see that other people have 15 Lamborghinis, they're going to feel poor. So he's totally out of touch with reality. He's saying that if you are rich, but you see someone richer than you, you're going to feel poor. But 53% of people in Argentina live in poverty. They don't have Lamborghinis. This is not a matter of someone who's already rich feeling like they're poor compared to rich people. People in Argentina are struggling to buy food, and the president is talking about Lamborghinis. He's so out of touch with reality. But things start to make more sense when you realize who is filling the government of Milei, whom he picked to be his top officials. One of the most powerful people in Milei's government is the economy minister, Luis Caputo, who was previously the finance minister under the previous right-wing millionaire oligarch president, Mauricio Macri. He was brought back now as the minister of the economy. And what is his background? Luis Caputo. He previously worked at the US bank JP Morgan based in Argentina, and he was in charge of Latin America trading for JP Morgan. And then he worked as the head of Latin America trading for Deutsche Bank. So his background is working on Wall Street in the financial sector for US and European banks profiting from investing in Latin America. He is a representative of the financial oligarchy in Latin America. And Caputo is also a multimillionaire. So while the majority of people in Argentina are in poverty and families are surviving on just a few $100s per month, and they're barely making enough to buy food. Well, Caputo has millions of dollars stashed in bank accounts in the United States. This was revealed by an Argentine journalist who got access to a disclosure document that Caputo had to file when he was nominated as Minister of the Economy. It shows that he has numerous bank accounts in US dollars at numerous banks in the United States. And these are just the bank accounts that Luis Caputo has. This is not including his investments. This is not including his real estate holdings. It's also not including the accounts he has in offshore tax shelters, because Luis Caputo was named in the Paradise Papers, which was the leak of information about offshore tax shelters. And this was a huge scandal in Argentina back in 2018, because previously he had been the finance minister, but he was brought back by Milei to be the minister of the economy. He himself confirmed on Twitter that the leaked documents showing his foreign bank accounts were real. And he quote tweeted them from his official account. And he wrote, I'm not joking, this is a real quote from Luis Caputo, the minister of the economy under Javier Milei. He said, quote, "I earned my money working in the private sector, breaking my soul." End quote. I love this quote because it's a Freudian slip. So yeah, he worked hard in the finance sector, moving money around. It's the hardest work in the world, moving money in an air-conditioned office in his suit and tie. But it's so funny that he said he broke his soul, because he truly did break his soul. And Milei himself, where does he come from? Where does this self-declared anarcho-capitalist politician come from? His entire career was cultivated by a series of billionaire oligarchs, including one of the richest oligarchs from Argentina, Eduardo Ernakian, who is basically a kind of Koch brother of Argentina. And he helped to cultivate Milei over decades and cultivate some of the people around Milei who are now in his government. But again, wealthy foreign investors love Milei because they've been getting richer and richer. He's been paying billions of dollars to foreign bondholders, many of whom are on Wall Street. They are vulture funds on Wall Street that buy up the distressed debt of global South countries and demand payback. And he has been obediently paying them back because, again, they're his friends. He is himself a millionaire, and he has been supported by oligarchs his entire career. Now, supporters of Milei are saying that he's saving the economy by fighting inflation and bringing down inflation. But inflation in Argentina in November of 2024 was still 166% year on year. That's still some of the highest inflation in the entire world. Now, yes, it's true that Milei did bring down annual year-on-year inflation from a peak of 292% in April of 2024. Again, a peak of 292%. But 166% is still very high. And the reality is that inflation, yes, was a problem before Milei came into office. It was a major problem, but it massively increased in his first several months in office. And yeah, now it's coming down. But why is it coming down? Because he has completely crushed the purchasing power of average people in Argentina. The majority of people in Argentina are living in poverty. They can barely afford food, yet alone other goods and services. So yeah, if you completely crush the purchasing power of your people and deindustrialize the economy, then okay, you can bring down inflation, but what are the side effects of that? What is happening in the rest of the economy? People are suffering. And the reason that inflation was such a big problem in the first place is because the Argentine government has unpayable debt. It can't pay it off, and it ran out of foreign exchange reserves, and it was hemorrhaging money trying to pay international bondholders and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. Just Argentina owes 20% of all of the global debt owed to the IMF, which is based in Washington and dominated by the United States. And why does Argentina have so much debt with the IMF? It was not because of the left-wing forces and the Peronists in Argentina. It was because of the previous multi-millionaire right-wing oligarch president, Mauricio Macri, who was a close ally of Donald Trump. And in 2018, he took the biggest loan in the history of the IMF. $57 billion, despite the fact that the US-dominated IMF knew that Argentina would not be able to pay off that loan. Again, it was not the left that took on that loan. There's this narrative that the left in Argentina has been irresponsible with government spending, but they're not the ones that took on the biggest IMF loan in history. It was the right-wing multimillionaire oligarch president Macri. So this raises the question, why did the IMF agree to give this massive loan to Argentina when they knew that Argentina couldn't pay it off? Well, it's because it was a political decision made by the Trump administration. If you don't believe me, this was admitted by one of Donald Trump's top Latin America officials. His Latin America advisor, Mauricio Claver, he did an interview in 2020 in which he admitted that the Trump administration pressured the IMF, which is dominated by the US. The US is the only country with veto power. The Trump administration told the IMF to give Argentina's right-wing leader the biggest loan in history in order to influence the 2019 election in Argentina. He admitted this. This is a top Trump administration official admitting it. This is not my opinion. He was saying this was a form of US government interference in Argentina's election to try to help to stabilize the economy on behalf of a right-wing millionaire oligarch, and the US wanted Macri to stay in power, but he ended up losing the 2019 election because of the economic problems and the inflation. The previous presidential election in Argentina had been held back in October 2019, and in the lead up to that election, inflation was growing very significantly under the right-wing rule, the oligarch rule in Argentina. It increased from 25% in April 2018 to 55.8% in April 2019. And a lot of people were angry at the right-wing government. So the government of Macri asked for the biggest IMF loan in history to try to stabilize the economy and bring down inflation. And they slightly brought it down 5% as of the October election. But it wasn't enough, and he still lost the election. And then when the president who won the election, Alberto Fernandez, came to power, he criticized the IMF debt and he said it was unpayable, which is true. It was unpayable. He knew that. He gave a speech at the UN General Assembly condemning this IMF loan, and he refused to take the rest of it. Over $40 billion of it had been administered when Macri was president, and he refused to take the remaining part of the loan because he knew it couldn't be paid off. Argentina's left-wing vice president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, who had previously been president, she also criticized the loan, and she argued that Argentina should simply not pay it. She said it was not taken under appropriate circumstances. It was a form of corruption by Macri, backed by Trump. It was a form of election meddling in Argentina's internal affairs. It was not legitimate, and they should not pay it. And this actually led to a major split, a major fight between the centrist president, Alberto Fernandez, and the left-wing vice president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. They were elected together as part of the same coalition, but they had very different policies. And ultimately, Alberto Fernandez, who is more centrist, he gave in to the pressure, and he sat down at the negotiating table with the IMF and said that he would renegotiate and try to find a way to pay off the debt, which was odious debt. It should not have been paid. And the fact that it was unpayable meant that Argentina was hemorrhaging its foreign exchange reserves, running out of hard currency, and this led to high rates of inflation. And because of the high rates of inflation, that is why Javier Milei won the 2023 presidential election. It's not because everyone in Argentina or the majority of people in Argentina are very right-wing and they're all libertarians and they hate the government. It's because the economic situation was horrible. Inflation was very high. People were unhappy. And the reason that was happening is because of the unpayable debt taken on by the previous multimillionaire oligarch president, Mauricio Macri, whose finance minister, Luis Caputo, the billionaire former Wall Street banker, he was brought back by Javier Milei to be Milei's Minister of the Economy, one of the most powerful people in his government. So Milei is continuing in the same footsteps of the right-wing oligarchs in Argentina who created these problems in the first place, but they blame the left. And meanwhile, he is selling the country to U.S. oligarchs. To understand just how much damage Milei's libertarian policies are doing to industry in Argentina, I highly recommend going to the website of the National Institute of Statistics and the Census, which is run by the Ministry of the Economy. And every month, they publish what is known as the Industrial Manufacturing Production Index. The latest report is from November 2024. And it shows how after Milei came to office in December 2023, manufacturing production in Argentina plummeted. The report divides manufacturing by industry, and you can see that most of the industries in Argentina in the previous year, as of November 2024, the first 11 months of Milei's government, most of the industries were declining drastically. There was a massive fall in the textile industry, in the paper and wood industry, in the refining industry, refining of oil and chemicals. There was a fall in the production of non-metallic minerals and basic metals. There was a fall in the production of metals and machinery and equipment. There was a fall in the automotive industry, and there was a fall in the furniture industry. The only two industries that grew were food, beverages, and tobacco, and then the sector described as other equipment, apparatuses, and instruments. But then if you dig down deeper in the data, you can see that even in the industries that appear to be growing under Milei, that growth is really concentrated in a few sectors. So if you look at the overall industry of food and beverages, you can see that almost all of the industry is actually declining. But most of the growth is happening in one subsector, which is the grinding of vegetable oil plants. So the production of vegetable oil has been skyrocketing. There was a slight increase in the production of sugar and chocolate products. So, okay, Argentina is going to produce vegetable oil and sugar and chocolate. Now, let's look at another part of this report, which is looking at the massive decline in the production of basic metals. In order to have a modern industrialized society, a country should be able to produce basic metals. Well, not in Milei's libertarian paradise in Argentina. The industry that produces basic metals declined by 19% year on year as of November 2024. The steel industry basically collapsed, declining by 24%. And the metal smelting sector, foundries, fell by 20%. The machinery and equipment industry in Argentina was even harder hit. Year on year, as of November, the machinery and equipment industry fell by 21.6%. Production of agriculture and fishing machinery fell by 28%. And production of apparatuses for domestic use fell by 26%. And finally, let's take a look at the car industry. Argentina, it's a modern country. If they want to be a developed country, they should be able to produce cars, right? It's the 21st century. Nope. Under Milei, the automobile industry has also been rapidly declining. Year on year, the overall production of cars and car parts fell by 12.8%, and the production of car motors fell by 16.5% year on year. Okay, so I think I've made my point very clear. Milei's neoliberal free market ideology is leading to the deindustrialization of Argentina. So what are the sectors that are actually growing under Milei's free market policies? What actually is growing is the mining sector, the agricultural export sector, not the production of food for domestic consumption, but export of agricultural products, and the financial sector. So what is happening to Argentina is becoming a resource colony for the rich colonial powers like the US and Europe. They're going to import food and they're going to import raw minerals like lithium from Argentina. And then the banking sector, bankers will get rich by helping to guide the investments of foreign investors who want to buy up Argentine assets or buy up Argentine companies. Meanwhile, people in Argentina, the majority of them live in poverty, and they are losing good manufacturing jobs. Here I want to look at a few more reports which were published by the National Institute of Statistics from the Ministry of the Economy. These reports provide a monthly estimate of economic activity. The most recent available report is from October 2024. It shows that the biggest increase was a 7.4% increase in the mining industry, the exploitation of minerals in Argentina. There was a 2.3% increase in the agriculture industry, and there was a 1.8% increase in the financial intermediation sector, the finance sector. And then there was a 0.5% increase in real estate. And then also government tax collection increased. So these are the sectors that are growing in Milei's libertarian paradise: taxes, mining, agriculture, finance, and real estate. Meanwhile, what were the sectors that were falling the most? The construction sector fell by 14.5%, industrial manufacturing fell by 2.3%, and fishing fell by 50%. Okay, now let's look at the data for September 2024. You can see basically the same pattern. The mining sector grew by 7.6%, the agriculture sector grew by 3.1%, and the finance sector grew by 2.5%. Meanwhile, industrial manufacturing fell by 6.2%, construction fell by 16.6%, fishing again fell by 25%, and also the hotel and restaurant industry fell by 6%. Let's briefly look at two more. In August 2024, the mining industry grew by 6% and the agriculture industry grew by 4.5%. Meanwhile, the construction industry fell by 18% and industrial manufacturing fell by 6.7%. And finally, in July 2024, agriculture increased by 23.6%, mining increased by 5.7%, and construction fell by 14.8%, industrial manufacturing fell by 5.6%, and hotels and restaurants fell by 4.5%. You get the idea. I don't need to look at other monthly reports. The point is that Argentina, its manufacturing sector is being destroyed. It is being deindustrialized. The sectors that are growing under Milei's libertarian policies are the extractive sectors that are turning Argentina into a colony, an agricultural colony and a mining colony. And we've seen this happen before in Latin America. This is exactly what happened with the rise of neoliberal market fundamentalism in the 1980s. In the 1960s, in fact, Argentina had previously been a good example of a developmental state. Argentina had left-wing nationalist governments that implemented policies known as import substitution industrialization to develop their own local manufacturing capabilities, making cars and other technology, and not simply exporting raw materials, minerals, and agricultural products, and then importing the manufactured goods produced abroad. However, what happened? In the 1980s, neoliberal structural adjustment policies were imposed on Latin America by the United States through the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which is based in Washington and dominated by the US. The US is the only country with veto power in the IMF and the World Bank. Throughout the 1960s, 70s, into the 1980s, manufacturing made up 25 to 30% of GDP in South America. In fact, if you look at data and you compare South America to other formerly colonized parts of the world, including Asia and Africa, South America had the highest percentage of GDP going to manufacturing production. This was the peak of the era of economic nationalism, of import substitution industrialization. South America had major manufacturing producers. And what happened? In the late 1980s into the 1990s and early 2000s, it completely collapsed. And today, South America has been the most deindustrialized region on Earth. The other region that was heavily deindustrialized was Sub-Saharan Africa. However, in 2020, South America fell below Sub-Saharan Africa in terms of the manufacturing share of GDP. This has been the product of the free market libertarian policies, because what Javier Milei is preaching, this libertarian anarcho-capitalist ideology, is not new. It's just a fake populist version of the same old Washington consensus that was imposed on Latin America in the 80s and 90s, in what was known as the lost decades. This is the same old neoliberal market fundamentalism that was imposed on the region by the IMF and the World Bank. And in Argentina, we saw the same exact thing happen with the free market fundamentalist policies of the military dictatorship that was backed by the US, or in Chile under Augusto Pinochet, another far-right military dictator who was installed after a CIA-orchestrated coup in 1973 on September 11th that overthrew the democratically elected socialist president of Chile, Salvador Allende, and installed the far-right neoliberal dictatorship of Pinochet. Milei likes to portray himself as a populist who's fighting the establishment, but he is the epitome of the establishment. He is serving the interests of the financial oligarchy on Wall Street. And yes, it's true. They've been making a killing. They've been getting very rich through investing in Argentina's stock market. But we have to look at the sectoral composition of the Argentine stock market. The main stock market index in Argentina is called the Merval, which is short for Mercado de Valores, which stands for stock market. If you look up the top companies that make up a big part of this index, the Merval, what are those companies? They are banks, the telecommunications company, a holding group for investments, a finance group, an electricity company, another energy company, another bank, and an aluminum company. So excluding the aluminum company, all of the other companies are either utilities, so they are natural monopolies, or the financial sector. So these are not productive companies that are innovating and creating new technologies and creating products and manufactured goods for people. These sectors are concentrated in the natural monopolies of the economy. This is a kind of neo-feudalism. These sectors are growing very rapidly as foreign investors pile in and try to profit from speculating on their stocks. Their stocks have been going up a lot, which benefit stockholders and it benefits the executives in these companies who get higher bonuses. But this doesn't actually benefit average Argentine people, working people. This doesn't benefit the real economy. All it benefits is this small handful of oligarchs who control the finance sector and the electrical grid. But this is exactly why the US-dominated IMF and the Western financial press is in love with Milei. They say Milei is great because he's making the rich much, much richer. And he's doing privatizations of state-owned companies and institutions in Argentina. And the thing about privatizations is that in the short term, they provide a sugar rush to the economy because you have all this money that comes in from the state selling off assets. But that's a short-term sugar rush. Where does that money go over time? If that money simply goes to paying foreign bondholders, if that money is not actually invested by the government in a sovereign wealth fund, then the country is not going to benefit. The economy is not going to benefit from these privatizations. They are a short-term sugar rush that make the economy look like it's doing well. But in the long term, they do serious economic damage. We've seen this happen all across Latin America with the mass privatizations in the 90s and 2000s. Electricity was privatized, transportation, even water grids were privatized, and the results were all the same. Average people did not have access to clean water. They did not have access to electricity. The costs of electricity and water skyrocketed. It was a disaster for average working people, but rich people got even richer. This is exactly why the world's richest oligarch, Elon Musk, with more than $400 billion of wealth, is so extremely pro-Milei. He's a close friend of Milei. They're constantly meeting. And this is why Elon Musk tweeted, "I recommend investing in Argentina." But he knows that foreign investors are not going to invest in manufacturing production in Argentina. That's collapsing. They're going to invest in banks. They're going to buy up the financial sector. They're going to buy up big agricultural corporations that are going to export unprocessed food to other countries. They're going to invest in mining in Argentina and buy up its natural resources and minerals, which is exactly what Elon Musk wants to do. So in other words, Argentina is being turned into a resource colony. And when people claim that Argentina used to be one of the richest countries in the world, what they don't realize is that Argentina, in the early 20th century, its economy was based on exporting agricultural products and raw materials. And this is exactly what Milei is turning Argentina into once again, a deindustrialized resource colony. In the early 20th century, Argentina's population was very small, and its GDP per capita looked like it was very high because it was a country run by a bunch of colonial landlords who were descendants of the European colonizers. And they had these big farms that were operated by indigenous people who were treated basically like slaves and were paid very little to nothing. And they produced a bunch of agricultural products and beef, and then they exported those agricultural products, which made them very, very rich. It was a plantation-style economy like the Confederacy, like the Southern economy in the United States during the Civil War. And just as in the U.S. Civil War, the land-owning slaveocracy in the South was fighting against the industrialists concentrated in the North who wanted to have a modern, technologically advanced, industrialized economy. Similarly, in Argentina and all across Latin America, for decades, we've seen a fight between the industrialists on one side and the landlord class, the agricultural slaveocracy, the descendants of the colonial slave owners who are the big landlords, and their allies in the financial sector. So these two sectors have been fighting against each other. And during the left-wing governments and the nationalist governments in South America, represented by people like Juan Perón in Argentina, who emphasized the industrial sector and developing Argentina technologically. But it's not just him. Throughout South America, there are many other developmentalist leaders who are either socialists or left-wing nationalists who are pushing for developing a strong manufacturing sector. Instead, what we now see in the neoliberal era is that the landlords won. The finance sector won. They're deindustrializing the region, and Argentina is simply the latest example in the long line of countries that have followed this path. And the perfect symbol of this is that Milei has actually been sending the gold, the physical gold, from the Central Bank of Argentina to London to be used as collateral in the London bullion market. This is the perfect symbol of how Milei is turning Argentina into a financial colony of the West, especially considering that, again, Argentina was previously an unofficial colony of the British Empire, and now its gold is in London. And this also means that in the future, if Argentina doesn't pay its foreign bondholders, then they will simply seize its gold in London. This is actually what happened previously when the Argentine government defaulted on debt and bondholders from vulture funds on Wall Street, they sued Argentina using the U.S. justice system, and then a U.S. hedge fund, a vulture fund as it's known, seized an Argentine Navy ship. They seized a ship belonging to the Argentine military, demanding payment of hundreds of % of profit, billions of dollars of profit, based on these defaulted bonds that this U.S. vulture fund on Wall Street bought up at a fire sale for pennies on the dollar. This is financial colonialism, and this is what Javier Milei and his free market libertarian policies are turning Argentina into: a financial colony and a resource colony of oligarchs in the United States. And meanwhile, the country is being deindustrialized and the majority of people are living in poverty. It's a very bleak situation, but if you want to get more information about what's actually going on, please like and subscribe. Please follow our work here at Geopolitical Economy Report. I am Ben Norton. I'm the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. Thank you for joining me today for this very long analysis. I will see you all next time.